Moving departmental reports, we have one this evening, which I'll present to council, and that's to present to you the city manager's recommended 14-15 fiscal year annual budget. I need a clicker to do that. And the action for council tonight is to call for the public hearing on the budget recommendation, which will be at your June 3rd city council meeting. Just to kind of overview the budget, it's $95.8 million. This is actually a 6.1% increase over the current year's budget. However, that increase is driven largely by several capital projects. I know sometimes people get excited about year-to-year variations in governmental budgets, but in a city our size, capital intensive in fire and technology, police, etc., that number will go up and down depending on equipment that we're buying from year to year. So when you normalize it in terms of the operating budget, capital, it's a 2.1% increase over your current operating budget. As we had a discussion in the previous meeting, unfortunately, we continue to see very little natural growth in revenue. What we mean by that is simply growth in your property tax base or growth in sales tax activity. And as we come toward the end of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about more about the future. Although this budget was a challenge, next year's budget may be even more of a challenge. And I started off and forgot to do my most important job, and that is to thank Warren Wood and Karen Hurley for the great job that they do putting this budget together, and also the department heads. It's fun to be a budget person when revenues are growing by 5-6% a year and you're trying to figure out how best to allocate those funds. It's tedious, it's difficult, it's challenging. When every meeting begins with where are we going to cut, what can't we do, what do we have to do without. And so I really appreciate the teamwork that all the department heads bring to the table as we have those difficult discussions and meetings. I'm proud of the fact that the culture we have in the city organization doesn't pit departments against each other. There's no sense of horse trading, there's no arguing and fighting among the departments. Everybody recognizes the times that we're in, and they really work collaboratively to put together a budget, and appreciate Warren's great work in that, and Karen as well. So as we talk about the general fund, this is somewhat of a historic budget. It's been 19 years since the city manager has sat in this chair and recommended a tax increase. And as all streaks begin, all streaks come to an end. Your general
first time they call for a rate.
Correct, I'm sorry, a property tax rate increase. The recommended general fund budget is $46.2 million, and it's based on a property tax of 52 cents per $100 in value. And so that's a 2-penny increase over your current rate of 50 cents per value. So let's talk for a minute about what I feel like is driving the need to increase property tax by 2 cents. It's no surprise that I had Mr. Hanson do a very in-depth discussion about our road paving situation throughout the city, because it really rose to the top, and we've been talking about it for the last couple of years, that a city our size, with the amount of lane miles we have and a resurfacing budget of about $450,000, we are now on a cycle, if we were to continue, that every street on average would get touched once every 60 years. And that's really beyond the life cycle of a city street. So I'm recommending a penny, which will effectively double the amount of funding that goes toward paving our streets. That's not going to have some kind of big dramatic impact. It's really just going to take us back to what the standard should be, and be repaving streets about once every 30 years. We feel like this is important because, as Mr. Hanson discussed at your last meeting, if you don't catch the streets at certain points, then the cost gets bigger and bigger and bigger because the streets continue to deteriorate. It goes from being a couple of inches of asphalt that will maintain them for another 20 years to completely digging it up putting down new base, etc., and basically rebuilding your streets. And so we feel like we're kind of at a critical juncture that if we don't catch it now, it's going to continue to grow and be a significant problem for the city in the future. The second penny is really based on the revenue losses and the lack of revenue increases that we've seen over the last several years. And there's a host of revenues, but the big ones obviously are property tax, which we've seen that go down for 2 years, and then very anemic growth, and I'll talk about that in a second. In very simple, basic terms, your revenue growth has not kept pace with expenditures. And in a minute I'll also talk about some of the cuts and changes that we've made to make that balance for the last several years. But we feel like we're at the point where that's no longer possible. And one of the tipping points is the fact that in the coming fiscal year, 14-15, you're going to lose $255,000 that was a reimbursement from the state of North Carolina for changes that the General Assembly made to property tax years ago. We call it the hold harmless in-house. It simply means that years ago the General Assembly decided that certain inventories were no longer going to be included in property tax. They recognized the negative impact that was going to have on cities, so they said, okay, cities who will lose money in this, we'll hold you harmless. We will cut a check from the state and pay you that. The hope was that the overall tax base would grow enough in that period of time that we would break even. Unfortunately, as the mayor pointed out, our tax base just has not grown significantly. So it has continued to be $255,000 that we receive from the state of North Carolina that we will not receive in the coming year. So the impact of a 2-penny increase in the tax rate on the average home in Hickory will be $2.50 a month. Other highlights in the general fund is fund balance. We're recommending appropriating $1.4 million in fund balance. $900,000 of that is actually used for the capital expenditures that I mentioned, talking about how just the overall budget is up. So about $500,000 of that is going in toward normal operating expenses. Now, you all who've worked with the city budget for a number of years kind of understand how this works. We don't anticipate actually spending the $500,000 worth of reserves. We're very conservative in the way we budget revenue. We always expect to gain a little bit more revenue than what we have in the budget. We've had a form of a hiring freeze. We've kind of started calling it a soft hiring freeze because we've basically frozen all the positions and eliminated them that we figured out how to do without reorganization and different assignments. Now, we're really just kind of dragging our feet and asking the department to try to make ends meet for a month or two to save a little bit of money on the expenditure side. So what typically happens is at the end of the year, you collect a little bit more revenue than you budgeted, and you expend a little bit less than you budgeted, and that number covers that amount of fund balance that you apply. So that reserve amount doesn't actually get spent, it gets covered. We've gotten to the point where that $500,000, so $900,000 we planned for capital, but that $500,000 we do not feel will be covered by increased revenue and less expenditure throughout the year. That's part of how that 1 penny plays into the budget plan. If you got into a habit of spending your reserve to meet your operating needs every year, because the city is in good financial health, you could do that for a period of time, but you basically are putting yourself on an unsustainable path. It's kind of budget 101. You can't spend one-time money for ongoing expenditures, and your reserves are just that. They're a pot of one-time reserves. As I mentioned, basically no growth. When you got to go out to 3 decimals to find growth in your property tax base, you're not having any growth. And in the past 3 years, it's actually declined 3.5%. So I'd kind of stop here and say, the conversation that we had in the last meeting about making investments in the city to spur growth, that's not something that's future. That's something that you're feeling and experiencing right now in your budget. Because even though we've had some great investments and some high-profile wonderful projects with the mill redevelopments and others, in the scheme of over $4 billion tax base, you're not making up for the loss of businesses that are leaving and values that are decreasing. So we really are at a crossroads. And I would say that's been our single biggest challenge as we've gone through the recession. We were dealing with job losses before the national recession hit. So we were already in a difficult, tight spot, and when the recession came along about the time we were optimistic that maybe things would start improving. So let's switch gears and talk. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
That .001, that's correct. Now, that's $4 million out of $4 billion.
Yep. That's right.
And that's the product of
New buildings.
demolitions and devalue against permits.
Yep. That's it. The county only revalues property once every 4 years, and so for those of us who just own a business or a home, if we didn't do anything different, that value stays in place for 4 years. So it's new stuff and stuff leaving that creates your tax base, either growth or reduction year to year. And we'll talk in a minute about the revaluation and what we're seeing there. Better news in the water and sewer fund. It's a great blessing, and in so many ways we're living off the wisdom and the foresight of future previous city councils that invested in infrastructure for water and sewer, because we've got a very strong regional system. Annual budget of $25.8 million. Of course, that system pays for itself. Nobody's tax dollars go in to fund the water and sewer. That's all paid completely by the monthly bills that each of us pay when we're connected to the city system, and the contracts, which are numerous and have a lot of volume, where we sell water and even provide sewer services to neighboring municipalities. So, consistent with council policy that you adopted several years ago, we're looking for a 1.5% increase, which is consistent with the CPI. And we feel like that's been a smart practice of the city to keep pace with your expenditures so that your water and sewer fund stays healthy. The average residential water bill will go up 82 cents a month. We do have a major project that you awarded the design on a few months ago to build a $2 million pump station and sewer line installation that will actually move sewer from a neighboring community where we're paying to have it processed and put it at your Henry River wastewater treatment plant where we have capacity. And that's a good, smart business investment, because you'll recoup that $2 million in about 5 years, and so you'll save your water and sewer system a significant amount of money each year. Also, as you know, we several years ago bought the town of Catawba's entire system, water and sewer. Entered into a 50-50 partnership with Catawba County to expand that plant to 1.5 million gallons. That construction is coming along well, and so in your upcoming budget, we're recommending that you add staff to operate this new plant, and again, that will be paid for by the users of the plant and by Catawba County if it becomes a deficit. We'll continue, as we have, to be a regional water and sewer provider, and you all just at your last meeting approved an example of that contract for the town of Longview to provide them water. So these partnerships are, as the mayor pointed out, we're about growth in our whole MSA, our whole region, and these partnerships help our neighboring communities. Water and sewer is an extremely expensive endeavor. Smaller communities simply cannot afford to do it. Again, we've set ourselves up historically to be a regional provider, and so it's good for our residents to have this large system. We get the benefit of selling water to our neighbors, and it's good for our neighbors as well, because they frankly won't be able to afford it at some point in time, and that's kind of how it works. They come to us when they get to a critical cost point, and we work out a contract with them.
I see that 4 of our top 5 water users are municipalities.
Yeah. Yeah. That is big. When you think about what it used to be when we had the mills that used a lot of water, and it's been great that we've been able to now in effect sell that to other communities. So let's spend a minute and talk about our personnel. Slide that over here. Let's talk about solid waste. Sanitation's important.
Oops.
Don't hurt me there, John. Mine's not the same as what I got. So your solid waste fund is just under $6 million, and it's been your policy for the last several years to just gradually look at how that can continue to pay its way with the user fees that are collected each month. And so I'm recommending, as we have in the past years, to bump that up $1.50 a month from $15 to $16.50 a month. I'm happy to report that we're still priced below private competition if you were to seek to have your trash collected by a local carrier. Your bill would be significantly more than what you pay the city. One thing that's exciting, and again part of the capital expenditures, is that we are ramping up this year with capital in terms of equipment purchases to be prepared to go to single stream recycling in 15-16. And what that means is they will no longer sort at the curb. You know, the way it works now is we all put our little bins out there, and the truck comes by and they pick up our bin and they separate the glass and the paper and the magazines in bins on the truck. And that inherently limits the amount of recycling that you can offer in the community. So with our partnership with Republic Waste, all of us in the region are moving to single stream, which means we will have a big rollout, just like we do for our trash. It will be picked up every other week, and we'll be able to expand the number of items that are recycled, and it'll be a truck just like our trash trucks that come by and pick it up and dump it and haul it to the MRF where it's bundled and sold. And Mr. Hanson made a presentation to you about that recently, showing how that's going to work a year from now, but we've got to gear up for it this year with capital purchases. Now let's talk about our great folks. I am recommending 6 new positions be added. I've touched on most of those. The police department, as things change with cell phones and technology, has seen the need to have a specialized person who can get into tablets, phones, computers, and extract information that we need to do criminal investigations. When you ask a police officer to do that, it's a real challenge for them. Although they're very bright men and women, they're not trained to the level that we need in the technology that's so available today. And so after a lot of discussion, we felt like that was an effective position, something that we need in the police department. I've already mentioned the 3 wastewater treatment plant operators. Again, those are paid for from the system and specifically from the Catawba area. The utility locator specialist, which the state is requiring us to hire, and that will be funded by the Water and Sewer Fund. And then a fleet maintenance mechanic. As you know, the city runs its own garage. We're very happy with that operation. We've done cost comparisons, and we've also benchmarked against other communities every year, and that's a very effective operation. But we're a little bit understaffed there, and so we're asking to add a maintenance mechanic. So 2 of the positions of the 6 are actually paid from general tax dollars of the city, and the other 4 are covered through the fees in the utility system. Just to kind of put that in perspective, 10 years ago, the city had 684 full-time employees. Even with the addition of the 6 positions I'm requesting, we're at 654. We're still operating at roughly 5% below where we were 10 years ago. And the credit is to the 650 employees of the city. We've got great people.
So that's about a 5% reduction in employees, with a 5% increase in the population served.
That's right.
But we have added in police and fire.
We have, that's right. We've added a ladder company, and about 10 years ago we added in the fire department, or the police department as well. That's right, Mr. Mayor. So really you put those into it and you realize that it's been more than a 5% reduction in the other departments.
And that doesn't mean the other departments aren't important. It just means that when necessity requires action, we have done it without hampering those key services.
So I'm recommending a 1.75 and a 2.25, so it'll end up averaging around 2% merit-based annual raise for our coworkers, and that will go into effect in October. And our health insurance plan has been aggressively managed, and again, I want to tip my hat to Warren and to the members who serve on our committee, and Mike Bennett and others. They do a fantastic job of constantly reviewing that plan and being very aggressive in our wellness program as well. And we think that's one of the reasons that we've been able to keep our costs from escalating to the point that we can't afford it any longer. Let's look back for a minute before we look forward. This is a chart that we've been using a lot and beginning to talk about in the community that shows where we have been in terms of jobs. And we recognize, I think all of us do, loss of 45,000 jobs in our MSA, so that's not just the city of Hickory, but that's our neighboring counties. And we realize we've had that, but when you compare it to the other MSAs in the state, there are others who have lost, but we have lost more than all the rest. And maybe even more disconcerting is that along with the demographic trends that are going on with the baby boomers, we're losing that key demographic that Councilman Lell spoke about earlier. That is 20 to 44-year-olds. We're actually losing, and that number total is 25%. And those are the folks who create new businesses, who are the people who build homes and are engaged in the community and have a lot of things going on that are beneficial to the city.
Well, that shows up also in the under 9 categories.
Yeah, that's right. You're going to have less children when you have less parents. Absolutely. And the reason that I bring that up is to say that, as I said earlier, you're seeing the effects of that now. I mean, that loss of jobs, that loss of population is directly being seen in property tax and in sales tax. Supply and demand is going on in the housing market. And when you can buy somebody's house for less than tax value, that is going to get reflected in the next revaluation, because that's exactly how they come up with those numbers. We are seeing some growth in our building permits, but again, when you capture all of that together, it's still flat. And so we're not really seeing, in the tax revenues anyway, we're not really seeing the impact of kind of the slow national recovery that we're all hearing about. It is good news that you all have been very prudent in your practices and your policies and spending, that even through the downturn, the recession, you've maintained an adequate, maybe a little better than adequate fund balance. We talk a lot about the different things that we've done over the last few years with hiring freezes, etc. And I've really kind of covered this issue already in terms of telling you that one of the pennies on the property tax rate is to maintain that good financial health that you have. Obviously, with a 25% fund balance, you can dip into that for a year or two, and you're not going to see a dramatic drop, and you're not going to get letters from the LGC telling you to change your practices. But it worries me when the community puts its foot on the path of unsustainable practices, because it just gets harder the next year. A couple of years down the road, it'll be 2 or 3 pennies that you'll need to increase it just to hold yourself harmless. So, as staff, we're recommending that you go ahead and bite that bullet now and make up for those lost revenues. Revaluation is scheduled for January 1st of 2015. So your current year budget is not going to see any impact from revaluation, but obviously we're already trying to look in the crystal ball and talk to the folks at the tax department and figure out what's going to happen to values next year, because they've gathered that data, they're starting to crunch it. Mr. Meisner already knows what those numbers are, because he's one of the people that's putting that information together that they end up collecting. It goes back to the example I mentioned, when you're selling a home for less than its tax value, that information gets reflected to the tax department and they revalue the property less than it's worth today. We don't know how much that decline is going to be, and we don't want to start a lot of speculation, but we've talked to neighboring communities who've already gone through this, and we're concerned that it's going to be significant. For example, Burke County lost over 8% of their value when they did their revaluation. I don't know how you would accommodate that other than changing your rate to offset it. So that being said, we focus a lot in this business on property tax rate. Really what matters is how much are people paying in property tax. When values are going up, they end up paying more. They may not like that. Sometimes councils reduce the rate a little bit to offset that if they don't need that much money. Now we're in the opposite of that. Values are actually going to be going down. So it's very likely next year I will be recommending that you increase the rate. It may still be revenue neutral overall. You won't be collecting any more taxes, but your rate will have to go up to make up for the fact that your overall tax base has gone down.
And that's what we did 10, 15, we went down.
That's right. 10, 15 years ago you could go down significantly because the values were going up so much and you just didn't need that much revenue. The appreciation.
And we took the rate down 11% in 2002.
That's right. So we may be looking at the opposite of that. Hopefully not to the extreme of Burke County. We'll keep you apprised of that as it goes along.
But this is the deflation that some economists have talked about. So here we are at deflation, and none of us are surprised. It's just, it's been the logical progression for the last 6 or 8 years.
Would that were the only thing I was losing sleep over. As you all know from the information that we send out regularly, and I really appreciate Ms. Yade Fox playing a great role in bird dogging legislation and keeping us plugged in their ears, but I don't have good news on the privilege license. As a matter of fact, today the omnibus bill that it's tucked up in passed on second reading, so it is growing, it is moving along and progressing. The amendment that was put forward that the mayor mentioned was taken off the table, and so it's not in the bill that's moving forward. That amendment...
No privilege license?
No, well, it's $100, flat $100.
Okay.
The league had had some conversation, and they'd gotten a representative to sponsor an amendment, but then he withdrew it that would have at least taken into account the number of employees. So it would have tried to look at scale to say if you have X number of employees, you pay a fee per employee. But apparently that didn't get any traction. And I can talk about this all night, and I won't.
Well, that in effect actually brings some people's license tax up.
Yeah, it will.
Oh, it will.
Yeah.
It will expose some people to tax that have not ever paid.
So at this point, it looks like the General Assembly will pass that bill, and if they do, that will take $1.1 million out of the city of Hickory's budget. As we've talked before, that $1.1 million is largely collected from Sam's, Walmart, Target. We've kind of gotten this black eye of being this city that's out here charging all of our businesses this privilege license, but the reality is because we're a regional shopping hub, we have all of the retailers, and so we collect a large amount of money. That's just the nature of the fact that we're a retail hub for our MSA. And all of the cities that kind of fall in this category are retail hubs. So it's not anything that the city has done, it's just the fact that we're a retail hub, and this has been a good revenue source for the city all these years. When I heard it called a hidden tax, I pulled out the bill that we sent to Bentonville, Arkansas, and showed that to the individual and said, no, nothing hidden about it. It goes to Bentonville, Arkansas, and they write a check back to the city of Hickory and they pay it. It's not hidden. They know exactly what they're paying and they don't mind.
Well, at the League of Municipalities, they showed a chart of the impact on cities, and far and away, the greatest impact in the state as far as city percentage impact is us. Now, they call it a hidden tax because theoretically, if you levy that tax on the businesses, they mark it up. They put it into the cost of their products, mark it up, and charge you for it. Well, the same way they charge for their employees and they charge for maintenance and everything else. But the problem with the argument is they are charging us the property tax that they pay too. Nobody has proposed eliminating businesses' property taxes. So it's a sticky issue. By way of perspective, not every city in the state charges property privilege license at all. And the ones that do, it's all over the board as far as what they charge. I mean, I've seen some exorbitant numbers quoted in some cities. So the legislature's getting lobbied hard to bring what the people who are paying it consider fairness. So
It's unusual that those businesses would choose to come to those cities that are collecting it.
well, they claim that some cities, in fact, are leaving, or some businesses are leaving cities that charge high privilege licenses. Ours is not on the high side.
I think we'll see a lot of price rollbacks then because it's.
They're rolling them back every day, aren't they?
Sure. Everything ought to be free.
So that's the summary of a 214-page document. It's available on the city's website, and we have paper copies available at Patrick Beaver and the Ridgeview libraries. Appreciate y'all's attention to it, and I'll be happy to have further discussion or answer questions. I'll be happy to field questions as we review the document and come across things that we'd like to discuss. Thank you.
You did say these are on the libraries, and they be checked out, so they're kind of checked out.
No, I think you got to sit there and go through. I think we only have a handful at each library, but the whole document's available online as well. And I do need to take action to call for the public hearing on the 3rd.
Will you just run through the timeframe, which is with you and call for, except you just call for public hearing, have a public hearing, and then we have to have a budget in place by
July 1st.
July 1.
Right, so you've got your June 3rd meeting to have the public hearing and have discussion, and you've got your June 17th meeting if you need to have further discussion and debate on the budget. Or you could have a special workshop in between, whatever you want to do to come to decisions on it.
I believe we have a public hearing in June 3rd.
I'll second that.
Motion by Seaver, second by Patton. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. That's unanimous. This is a very intimidating looking and in fact somewhat heavy document. But if you go through it and just look at it page by page and you study what's on that particular page, there's some very interesting stuff in here that's not hard to understand. And there's also some stuff in here that's hard to understand. So, but I would suggest that you not just be intimidated and say, I'm not going to look at it, because there's a lot of good stuff that's easy to understand. And as I said, we've got index cards out there with every council member's, sorry to remind everybody, folks, every council member's phone number. Please, if you have questions about the budget, if you have questions about inspiring spaces, bond referendums, population growth, call us and let's talk about it. We're not trying to keep any secrets. I think it's pretty farsighted here to show we think next year's going to be tough. And it'd probably be easier to say, well, let's see if we can slide by this year and hope something better happens next year. And why bring it up if it ain't already happened? But we are trying to be very candid with it, seriously. Thank you, Mr. Wood and all. Karen Hurley.
Karen, I gotta say this. I come in early and I leave late a lot of times. And for the last month, I cannot beat Karen to work, and she's always here when I'm leaving. I mean, that's just, at this time of year, I don't think she was joking when she said she slept in her office a couple of nights ago. She comes close to it. So we really appreciate that. She does a fantastic job.
Okay, appointments, I'd like to